any project that utilizes any kind of federal funding is impacted, and we would have to comply with those federal regulations. But what's really important too is that many of the projects we see, many of the agencies who purchase rolling stock with purely locally or state funds, they still give a certain percentage of Buy America, and it's modeled on Buy America.
The United States Congress and the Biden administration have broadened the types of materials or goods that are covered by the Buy America Act regulations to include construction materials. They've also expanded the scope to cover different industries. So now also electricity, broadband, and real estate.
If you're going to bid and be competitive or be able to compete for these jobs, you have to produce product in the U.S. There's really no way around it other than producing in the U.S.
Maintaining a good client relationship and involving them, because in the end it affects them just as much as it does us suppliers. They want to see a certain product going in or a certain problem being solved, and so they need to work together with us suppliers, and they usually are open to. Same with authorities. We never found a closed door.
The starting point of the analysis is your aim as a Swiss infrastructure company in the United States. If your goal is to sell directly to the government, also known as government procurement, then you will find yourself under the regime, the legal regime of the Buy American Act of 1933, which is a Depression-era law that has been around for quite some time. The scope of goods and services covered under the Buy American Act is fairly broad. If your goal is to take advantage of public funding or sponsorship, infrastructure projects, then you will find yourself under the regime of the Buy America, without an N, regulations. Now, the Buy America regulations, until recently, were primarily focused on public work projects and water-related infrastructure projects, with an additional focus on iron, steel, and manufactured goods. The Buy America regulations are administered by the individual administrative agencies, in particular the transportation agencies, so transit, federal aviation, highway, and the railroad administration. The water projects are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, primarily. So since the election of the Biden administration, the scope of both sets of regimes has been broadened and made more restrictive for foreign producers. The Biden administration, by executive order, increased the domestic content requirement under the Buy American Act for government procurement contracts from 55% to 75% by 2029. The United States Congress and the Biden administration have broadened the types of materials or goods that are covered by the Buy America Act regulations to include construction materials. And they've also expanded the scope to cover different industries. So now also electricity, broadband, and real estate. Both legal regimes create the domestic content preference by imposing a price preference that acts as a gate to the eligibility of foreign producers' goods in the United States. So there are several exceptions to the legal regimes. The one that is most commonly known is the waiver. And we can discuss that in a bit greater detail in a moment. But the general trend is that those waivers are becoming less available and more restrictive. Under the Buy American Act, there is a treaty exception for foreign produced goods. And in particular, there is one large multilateral treaty called the WTO Agreement on Government Procurement, to which the United States and Switzerland are both parties. So Swiss companies, as a general matter, have that treaty benefit available to them. However, under the treaty, there are thresholds, monetary thresholds for the contracts that have to be met before the treaty benefits can be taken advantage of. And those thresholds currently are $183,000 for goods and services supply contracts, and just north of $7 million for construction contracts. So that limits the treaty exception. Finally, there is an aspect to these legal regimes that is not so much an exception to the legal regimes, but an alternative to them, and that is foreign direct investment. The domestic content regulations and laws here in the United States generally do not concern themselves with the ownership of the producer. So a foreign-owned U.S. business is on an equal footing, as a general matter, with a domestically owned U.S. producer. The recent developments in this area of law have, if anything, created an incentive for investment and a disincentive for commercial sales. As I mentioned previously, waivers have become more restrictive and will likely be less available than in the past. The Biden administration, by way of executive order, created a new office called the Made in America Office, and it endowed it with the mandate to essentially act as a central clearinghouse for domestic content requirement waivers. Now, previously, the waivers were reviewed and granted by the individual administrative agencies. Now all waivers have to go to the Buy America office for approval as well. The process for obtaining a waiver is that the foreign producer will apply to the relevant administrative agency. The administrative agency will itself review the waiver and post it publicly for public comment. It will then, at the end of the review period, take the waiver and the public comments, forward those to the Made in America office for further scrutiny. Once the Made in America office has scrutinized the waiver, the administrative agency then either grants it or denies it. Now, the White House has issued additional guidance regarding how waivers should be reviewed and what are acceptable waivers. And the key guidance there is that waivers should be time limited, targeted, and conditional. So again, they will be more restrictive, not less. The grounds for obtaining a waiver include impracticability and inconsistency of a domestic use of a domestic product with the public interest, the unavailability of domestic products in sufficient quantities and satisfactory qualities, unreasonable increase in the price of the overall project by at least 25%, and a broad catch-all category for exigent circumstances. So in general, although waivers are available, they should be, should become more difficult to obtain. again, create the entire legal regimes and developments of the last 2 years are creating an incentive for investment and a disincentive for commercial sales.
So as a rolling stock company, we deal mostly with the Buy America regulations. We also sometimes deal with FTA Buy America, FRA Buy America, and PREA if we're dealing with an Amtrak. We don't deal much with Buy American because that's mostly construction projects. It's important to know the difference, I guess, but the important thing is that they all have domestic content regulations. So it really does affect our everyday life. Any project that utilizes any kind of federal funding is impacted, and we would have to comply with those federal regulations. But what's really important too is that many of the projects we see, many of the agencies who purchase rolling stock with purely locally or state funds, they still give a certain percentage of Buy America, and it's modeled on Buy America. So even if we don't technically have to comply, the agencies often ask us to comply, whether that's because they're later going to get federal funding or because it's just a good PR move. I don't know, but it's something that's always top of mind with us. We always have to figure out how to do it. As we think about pricing, as we think about manufacturing and logistics schedules, as we think about choosing suppliers, Buy America or domestic content requirements always on our mind. And it's really important for us to understand how it works and to understand what the challenges and opportunities are for us in building a local supply chain. So the biggest one is that we're an existing Swiss company, been in business for over 80 years now, and most of our supply base is in Switzerland or close there in Europe. So we need to figure out how to utilize those relationships that we have and use the companies that we know and trust in manufacturing a product that has domestic content requirements. So what that's meant to us is being able to work with our suppliers and finding methods to manufacture over here, whether they are partnering with a US company, whether they're coming and moving over here themselves, setting up a base of operations here. But we really have been excited to support and assist those companies in doing that because it's a supply chain we know and trust. So we've really relied heavily on our local contacts. So state and federal government officials have been really important to us. Industry relationships have been really important to us. We joined in lobbying efforts, but also just keeping a very close watch on what's happening in Washington, in how those regulations, because they are subject to change a lot, and in how those are changing. We need to be in the middle of that conversation, and we want to be in the middle of that conversation with other Swiss companies as well, because we're similarly affected. So I think that's the biggest way we can overcome some of those challenges. So again, just keeping a really close watch on what's happening in Washington, D.C. and how those things are changing, and then having a voice there, which goes back to having a close relationship with a lot of the decision makers. But I do think it's really important as Swiss companies that we band together and that we make sure that we keep tabs on what each other are doing and be able to be a voice together. We all know that it's not just the domestic content requirements. They are impacted by what's happened recently. So the pandemic, supply chain issues, hyperinflation, things are just spiraling out of control. And all of that has an impact on domestic requirements. Because I think that sometimes Congress or the administration thinks that, well, if we can keep it all in the US, then we'll avoid those effects. And we all know that that's actually the opposite, right? Spreading ourselves out globally and being able to have more avenues is actually a better way to hedge against that. So being able to talk to Congress about that has been key for us. It's just critically important for us all to work together and just keep tabs on this. So maybe a couple of examples of what we've done recently. So, and some of these were even before COVID. So when the last administration put some tariffs on iron and steel and aluminum, which really, our trains are aluminum, so it really impacts our business. We went in and did a deep dive to determine what that would mean to us. And as it turned out, what it meant is that if we were manufacturing the trains here in the United States, we'd be paying anywhere from a 14 to a 25% tariff on any goods coming in. And we needed to have goods coming in because there's not an availability here in the United States for some of the things that we need. But if we were to manufacture certain parts of the train the trains over in Switzerland and bring them here, the tariff was at 0%. That makes no sense because it doesn't incentivize foreign investment in the United States. And I know that that is what Congress had intended, is to incentivize investment in the United States. So we went and testified before a United States Senate hearing about this and talked a lot about the impact of the tariffs, and were successful in getting a few things changed. Another one recently, the last administration was looking at changes to the Buy America Act, the FTA Buy America Act, and that got put on pause a little bit because when the new administration came in, they focused on the infrastructure bill, but it will come up again. In fact, the new administration has directed the FTA and the FRA to look at those domestic content requirements. So we discovered that the requirement under the FTA Buy America, it's two-pronged. Number one, you have to have a certain percentage of your content that is created in the United States. And the second prong is that you have to do the final assembly here in the United States. However, the labor costs of the final assembly was not calculated into the percentage, which disincentivizes a company from making foreign investment here. And I think that when we showed that to them, when we were able to give them the calculation, and we showed them with one of our trains what the content would be without that and what the content would be with it, and we also showed alongside what our investment in the United States was in creating a workforce here, in building our manufacturing facility here, then they really understood that and wrote that into what they were doing. So again, I think being able to be in the conversation as Swiss companies, understand that the United States desperately wants foreign investment from solid and ethical companies like come from Switzerland. And so I think to the extent that we can show them that that what they're doing is incentivizing that, we've had a lot of success in being able to be part of the conversation and helping them change.
For us, we have to differentiate our two typical client bases here, which is on the one side ski resorts, and on the other side DOTs, so departments of transportations, and other linear infrastructure operations, which is our typical two client bases. Also in the Alps, same so in the US. So it's not a new field for us, although the environment is a little bit different. When it comes to the DOTs, the federal part where the Buy American Act might be coming into play is much larger than for the ski resorts, obviously, because in our world, in the snow and avalanche world, for example, they use artillery weapons to mitigate the avalanche hazard in many operations, and they are trying to reduce the amount of these systems, therefore using systems as we provide, remote avalanche control systems. So these are the two client bases. And in general, it affects us by adding another layer of uncertainty, I would say. And we still don't know exactly how much does it affect us? How much do we have to fulfill? So there are all these variables out there that we don't know how it will affect us or also our clients. So we're talking to DOTs and the operations people, so the people using our systems, they also struggle a bit with it as they don't know, they cannot give really good advice on many ends how this would really affect us. Well, the first step, as I mentioned, it adds uncertainty for us. And therefore, we really want to identify what Buy American means, specifically for our product and in our niche industry here. On, for example, the legal end or a regulatory end, but also on the technical side, like which parts would be affected? What do we have to reproduce? And of course, we try to find ways around it. For example, local manufacturing. But we learned already that this can be very expensive. For some parts, we got some quotes and it's double the price than producing and shipping it from Switzerland. But we want to learn more about this because shipping those days is expensive. There are many delays. Yeah, it's not as smooth as it was. So we're looking into that, especially local manufacturing. Coming from the snow and avalanche world or mountainous terrain where we are constantly facing uncertainty, it's part of our work environment of our lives. When we're facing uncertainty, we try to reduce it proactively. And we try to do the same thing here. So we try to proactively learn more about the legal implications of it. What does it mean for our logistics? What does it mean on a technical level to produce locally? And we really try to involve our clients in that. They're very supportive usually. They know their way around. They know sometimes who to contact, who to talk to. So maintaining a good client relationship and involving them, because in the end, it affects them just as much as it does us suppliers. They want to see a certain product going in or a certain problem being solved. And so they need to work together with us suppliers, and they usually are open to. Same with authorities. We never found a closed door. It was the opposite. It was always open doors. Everybody's encouraging. This is not a showstopper. Come sit together, work with us, describe us what you need, describe us where your challenges are. And maybe you have a contact to a federal organization even already. It might not be the department that you really need to talk to, but they could use their network base inside their organization to refer you to the right person to talk to. So use that network in the authority bodies too, because yeah, we only can speak very well about that, and they have been very supportive. Yes.
In our industry, we primarily see the American Iron and Steel Act more so than the Buy American Act, but they're very similar. And the industry that we see it the most in is municipal. However, any industry that has government funding tied with it, part of their requirements make you meet the AIS or Buy American provisions, which, as you know, means the content must come from America, a certain percentage of it and whatnot. So it requires you to, if you're going to bid and be competitive or be able to compete for these jobs, you have to produce product in the US. There's really no way around it other than producing in the US. Well, we do have one advantage. One of our product lines we produce already in the US, and it's some of the larger diameter valves that we manufacture, and they meet the Buy American AIS requirements offhand initially. But we also have a product line that we develop specifically for the municipal and industry, and then rough mining or whatnot, anything that might have, it has some government funding. And this product is made in Switzerland by our parent company and imported to us. To be able to offer this product into projects where the government funding and the provisions are set forth, we must produce it in the US. The challenges we face with that are we don't mass produce these like our parent company does. They're selling it into North America, South America, Australia, all over the world, and they have foundries that are producing in mass numbers. We have to get a foundry. We produce much less limited product, and the foundry time is not as booked in. So one of the biggest challenges we face is the price. It's going to be a little higher to produce in the US. Again, it's primarily because of the mass numbers that you're doing. You can produce a product. If you were like numbers, the pricing would be similar. We found, and we see with our other line, it's just the challenge you have is you can't produce that many because it's more job specific rather than a stocking situation. Sure. And one thing that is, and it's a benefit to us, as I mentioned earlier, one of our product line, we do manufacture already in the US, and the other one we're producing. So we're able to capture from that foundry time. We have a foundry that we use. They're able to do it. They still can't make the mass numbers like we talked about. But the biggest advantage, we actually see an advantage as the content is rising. Most of our competition are selling imported product from, be it Asia or whatnot. And as the content requirement gets greater and greater, they have to do the same thing we're doing. And the advantage we have is we're already producing product in the US with one of our lines. So we do have some inroads, and we see ourselves in some cases where we're at a price disadvantage at the onset when the AIS or Buy American requirements are enacted, and our competition has to play by the same rules that we do. Sometimes we come out in a better light, even with what we feel is a superior product. We still feel we have a price advantage because we have those relationships that we've established with our partners. Recommendations wise for other companies, I would say, the key is build those relationships with a supplier and produce it in the US. And if you build the relationships, there's plenty of people, foundries, machine shops, or whatever you need to produce your product. There's plenty of people out there that's looking for work and looking for jobs and will do a good quality job for you. And it will be price competitive. If you've got the numbers, it can be price competitive.